my dear brothers and sisters, right now, as we speak, Mumia Abu Jamal is absolutely a prisoner of conscience, a prisoner that if they get their way, they will sentence my brother and order his death. But in a hearing, they wanted to give him a new trial. A new trial where his attorneys could produce evidence that might lead to Mumia Abu Jamal's freedom. But those that oppose it are seeking now to overturn the lower court ruling and sentence my brother to death. Mumia Abu Jamal is a political prisoner. If you look at the 58th chapter of Isaiah, God says, cry aloud, spare not, lift up thy voice like a trumpet, and show my people their transgressions, and the house of Jacob their sins. For 24 weeks now, we have lifted up our voice, and we have spared nothing or no one. And my voice is like a trumpet. And that's why the Honorable Elijah Muhammad broke into that conversation and said, if there was any symbol that could represent my work, it would be a trumpet. What is your work? The Honorable Elijah Muhammad is being asked. His work is the resurrection of the dead, and I am his trumpet. A trumpet is a sound that is difficult for you to ignore. Whenever you go to a nightclub and the trumpeter picks up that trumpet and delivers his solo, if his trumpet is not muted, it can be heard above all of the members of the band. That's the sound of the trumpet. And when one anointed with the Spirit of God is being used by God as his trumpet, above all the din of those who preach, above all the confusion of those who preach, a clear sound that will bring about the resurrection of the mentally and spiritually dead. Joanne Chesimard. Have you heard of my sister? Assata Shakur. A political prisoner. She is looked upon now as a domestic terrorist. I met her when I was in Cuba. I talked with my sister. She terrorizes nobody. Why then would the Justice Department of the government of the United States make this sister a domestic terrorist? What is a political prisoner? According to the American Heritage Dictionary, a political prisoner is, quote, a person who has been imprisoned for holding or advocating dissenting political views. When I was in Syria several years ago in a meeting with the then President Hafez al-Assad, Bashar al-Assad's father, the present president, he told me that in a conversation that he had with George Herbert Walker Bush, they were talking about terrorism. There are so many different definitions of what a terrorist is. Mr. Assad asked Mr. Bush, define the term for me. And guess what? The terrorist to America is the freedom fighter for those who fight for liberation. Nelson Mandela was looked upon by the regime in South Africa as a terrorist. Today, we look at Nelson Mandela as a universal hero, a man of stellar character, a man who served 27 years in prison for a crime that he did not do. He just was standing up for the liberation of his people. I was in Zimbabwe. It used to be called Rhodesia. And when Joshua Nkomo and Robert Mugabe were fighting for the liberation of their people, I read the papers written by Europeans who had usurped their land. And these Europeans called the fighters for liberation terrorists. Oh, America, you have just picked people up in different parts of the country, of different countries, and brought them to Guantanamo Bay. You won't even charge them, but you just hold them. President Obama, you said that one of the first things you would do when you became president was to close down Guantanamo Bay, free the captive. This has not been done. Here's what Joanne Chesimard said. I'm using her slave name, but I'm going to quote something from her. Her real name, that is an African name, Assata Shakur. She said that it means one who struggles, who fights for her people. She's now 65 years of age. They are offering $2 million for her capture. And now that she's labeled as a domestic terrorist, will our government find out where she lives and send a drone to kill her? Will you send people into Cuba to try to harm her and bring her back to America as a domestic terrorist? Listen to what she said. I had long ago become convinced that revolution was a science. Generalities were no longer enough for me. Like my comrades, I believed that a higher level of political sophistication was necessary and that unity in the black community had become a priority. We could never afford to forget the lessons we had learned from the counterintelligence program of the United States government. As far as I was concerned, building a sense of national consciousness was one of the most important tasks that lay ahead of us. I couldn't see how we could seriously struggle without having a strong sense of collectivity, without being responsible for and to each other. She went on to say, hip hop can be a very powerful weapon. It was so powerful. I'm digressing from her words, that the enemy sought to turn it from a weapon of consciousness for our people into a weapon that glorified thug life, that glorified drug life, that glorified where the enemy had placed us in what Dr. King called a sanctuary of criminal activity. She goes on to say, the government recognized immediately that rap music has enormous revolutionary potential. Certain politicians got on the bandwagon to attack rappers like Sister Soldier. Do you remember her? And NWA. You've got various police organizations across the country that have openly expressed their hostility toward rap artists. For them, most rappers fall in the category of potential criminals, cop killers, or subversives. Sister Asada Shakur says, I am a black revolutionary woman, and because of this, I have been charged with and accused of every alleged crime in which a woman was believed to have participated. The alleged crimes in which only men were supposedly involved. I have been accused of planning. They have plastered pictures alleged to be me in post offices, airports, hotels, police cars, subways, banks, television, and newspapers. They have offered, at that time of her writing, over $50,000 in rewards for my capture. And now, as I forestated, their reward is $2 million. And they have issued orders to shoot on sight and shoot to kill. Let me ask a question. What happened in the Justice Department that you would label my sister a domestic terrorist? What did she do? She's been in Cuba for nearly 30 years. Who did she terrorize? Who did she involve in a plot to overthrow this government that you could label her a domestic terrorist? My. Some of you have said you believe that she's been feeding stuff to people that are against the government of America. You believe? You don't classify people on a belief. You classify people on actual facts. What are the actual facts of our sister living in Cuba because she can't come back to the place of her birth because of what you have falsely labeled her? I am really disappointed that our president and our Justice Department under Mr. Holder would allow our sister to be named a domestic terrorist. But you know, there are many political prisoners now that I'm saying in the name of Allah and His Messiah, they have to be set free. Leonard Peltier of AIM, the American Indian Movement, arrested for allegedly shooting an FBI figure. That poor man has been in prison for a long, long time. When are you going to set him free? You have given men like Leonard Peltier and others life sentences. Look at my brother Jamil El-Amin. I visited him when he was in Reidsville, Georgia. You took him from Georgia and put him in Florence, Colorado, and he's there for life? For life? On a trumped-up charge that he murdered somebody? Do you remember the name Geronimo Jijaga Pratt? A Vietnam veteran, member of the Panther Party that the FBI feared because he was decorated as a war hero? You were afraid that he would organize black youth? My dear brothers and sisters, these are actions of a government that fears black liberation. He spent 27 years of his life in prison. And when he was set out, all charges dropped against him. He left America and went to Africa and died a little over a year ago. Died in Africa. Died after serving time in prison for a crime he did not commit. Larry Hoover, whom I mentioned last week, leader of the Gangster Disciples, after he changed that name to Growth and Development and started pushing the members of the Gangster Disciples into school now to get a high school education and go on to do constructive things, he was more dangerous doing that than selling drugs. So you arrested him while he was in prison and gave him 6 life terms. 6. You never intend for my brother to get out of prison. You did the same to Chief Malik Kaba of the Blackstone Rangers. They're all in the same prison in Florence, Colorado, maximum security. In prison 23 hours a day, 1 hour out, 23 in. But you have not been able to break them. Jamil El-Amin is there because he fights for the liberation of black people and he fights for Islam. Soon you will be released. Otherwise, you would make God and his prophets liars. The captives that are bound will eventually be set free. Who else do you have behind prison bars you have the Cuban Five. Cuban patriots who came to South Florida to find out who was plotting and planning and bombing hotels and doing terrorist activity inside Cuba. And when he went to the FBI and told them the information that they had learned about these domestic terrorists that were being used to destroy the influence of Cuba and to kill innocent people, instead of you arresting the real domestic terrorists, you arrest the Cuban Five. Some of them you've given life terms to, just for exposing the wickedness of some Cubans living in South Florida that are backed by a government that is not right. Do you have a cell already set up for me? Your evil has entered the ears and heart of God Himself. And the evil that you do to people, did you not know you have to pay for that? Did you not know that God is not mocked, that whatever you sow, you're going to have to reap? These political prisoners should be set free. Larry Hoover, Chief Malik, they could do great work in the inner cities, organizing young men not to be destroyers of their communities, but organizing them to do good for their communities. You wouldn't give them that chance. But your own white criminals, your own Jewish criminals, you open a way for them. We thank God for Bobby Kennedy and John Fitzgerald Kennedy, but I don't think their dad was holy and righteous. But the money that he got through bootlegging, he could make his sons senators and presidents. You wouldn't allow those of us who have had a criminal past to even reform and be redeemed. But you say you believe in God. The hypocrisy of the United States government is about to be shown up.